We frequently visited my grandparents around holidays, even though we didn't live in the same town. My aunt lived 2 houses down from my grandparents. The lady in the house between was creepy. She was a large woman, over 6 foot. She wore logging chains around her neck, a dress and work boots. The only time I remember seeing her outside was either in her garden in the back, or when she was washing the outside of her house, scrubbing the actual building. She did this very often. During this time, she would often yell at us kids and call us all kinds of things. She would tell us the devil would be coming for us. The adults told us to leave her alone and to avoid her at all costs. We would run the distance between my aunts and grandparents because when you passed by, she was watching out the windows. It was creepy, and we never went alone. One Halloween, one of our cousins dared us to trick-or-treat at her house. I remember how scared I was, but I didn't want to be a chicken. Plus, I was going with the group. One of us rang the doorbell, and there was a lot of banging noises in the house suddenly, like doors slamming. When she answered the door, she had a severed head in her hands, and we all went screaming. The adults told us it was a Halloween prop, and we knew we shouldn't be bothering her, and deserved to be scared. About a month later, my parents got a phone call about the lady. She had tried to kill my aunt when she was bringing in groceries, and had my young cousin in her arms. The lady had one of them rope saws, and had come up behind my aunt with it. She had put it over her head and around her neck and proceeded to saw. My aunt naturally flipped and started kicking the door. My uncle came and beat the lady down with a fire poker. The police investigation revealed that the woman had been digging tunnels under her home, which were coming up under my aunt's, my grandparents', and another neighbor's house. She had been bringing the dirt up and putting it in the raised beds of the gardens. My aunt survived, by the way, but she has a long scar across her neck. At the time, I lived with my parents, younger brother, older stepbrother, and cousin in a big but old house that sat in a cul-de-sac close to Main Street. Behind it ran an alleyway flanked by apartments, and it had a huge yard that my basement bedroom looked out on. We lived in a small town. Crime seemed minimal in this area, and I made my way out that Halloween night to make the most of the best day of the year. It wasn't just what happened that night, though. It was, of course, what came after, and one small incident that came before. A few days before Halloween, my stepbrother and cousin arrived home to discover a pickup truck full of dudes taking photos of our house. It was weird, but when we approached, the men seemed very friendly and complimented our Halloween setup. It was pretty great, that is true. The men sped off without incident and were quickly forgotten. My stepbrother and cousin re-entered the story Halloween night, the big event itself, at about 3 a.m. Both had been out drinking with their friends, and as such, both had left their respective vehicles and braved the icy walk home on their own. Cousin arrived home first, but couldn't seem to get his key in the lock. So he just sat there on the porch bench and waited for my stepbrother to show up. He did about a half hour later. After having a bit of a laugh at my cousin for being an uncoordinated person, he went to unlock the door for himself, and no luck. So they just bit the bullet and called my mom, waking her up to let them in. She was, of course, very unimpressed to be opening the door for a pair of drunk idiots at this time of night, and she didn't seem to buy their story about the lock not working. They insisted, though, and to shut them up, she finally relented and tried her key. She too could not get her key in the lock. Annoyed, tired, and now just confused, she wrote it off as a problem for tomorrow, and the three of them hit their respective beds. One other person arrived home that night, me, though I arrived much earlier than those two, and was in bed by about midnight. I woke up close to 1 a.m., still tired. All I could feel was anxiety, and I didn't know why. At first, I tried to tell myself that I had just gotten a bit too into the holiday, and had psyched myself out. But then I noticed a shadow. It was perfectly man-shaped and cast upon my window. I turned on my bedside lamp, blinked, and it was gone. It wasn't unusual, mind you, to see the shadows of people harmlessly walking through the alley, and I told myself that's all there was to it. Then, there was what happened after Halloween. I came home from school the next day. My parents were there. So was a locksmith, and there were also police. My parents were there because, well, that's where they lived. The locksmith was there because my mother had called him, as the confusion over the broken lock persisted. The cops were there because the locksmith and my parents had called them. When the locksmith proceeded to pull the tip of a knife out of our lock, I was relieved to see that's where the knife tip had ended up, and they discovered 2 of our window screens had been slashed, one on our garage, and one on my bedroom window. It was my turn to take the kids trick-or-treating. The previous year was my wife's, and we trade back and forth every year. My son and daughter are 7 and 9. I usually stay at the street while my kids go up to different houses to collect candy. After about a half hour of walking around, we came across one of the more popular hotspots for candy collecting. A main street in the neighborhood, lots of really cool decorations and animatronics on people's lawns. So I became a bit distracted and stopped watching my kids closely. At one point, they came back from a house accompanied by another girl about the same height as my daughter. She was wearing a weird homemade mask, like a cardboard cutout or something. My daughter asked if she could trick-or-treat with us, so I said sure, and we carried on together as a group. I didn't know who this girl was, but I figured she was a friend from school. As we continued, I started to notice a large man trailing us. He was wearing some sort of angry cat mask. It was kind of creepy, to be honest. I thought that maybe he was the father of the girl, so I tried to start up a small chat with him. I said something like, "Nice weather, right?" But he didn't respond. He just stood there staring at me while our kids went up to the stairs to the next house. I tried again, asking, "Hey, is that your daughter?" He nodded, but didn't say anything. I just figured he wasn't in the mood to chat, so I stopped trying. We carried on for about another 15 minutes until suddenly my kids came up to me and said they wanted to go home. This surprised me, as we hadn't been out for that long, and their bags were only about a third full. In any case, I agreed, waved goodbye at the man in the cat mask and his daughter, and started on our way home. The weird thing was, when I glanced back, the man and his daughter were just standing there, staring at us. I checked one more time as we turned the corner, and they were still standing there, not moving at all. At this point, I decided to ask my kids, "So who was that girl?" My daughter looked up at me with a confused look on her face. "She's your friend," my daughter replied. I asked her what she meant. Apparently, this girl with a cardboard mask approached them and said she was a friend of mine. She told my daughter she was too shy to ask if she could join us to trick-or-treat and wanted my daughter to ask me instead. I laughed at this story and replied to my daughter, "Why would you think she was my friend? I don't have any children friends." What my daughter said next chilled my bones. According to her, when the girl with the cardboard mask approached them for the first time, she wasn't wearing the mask, so they were able to see her face. As it turns out, she wasn't a girl at all, but an older woman around my age with wrinkles on her face. What's even more disturbing, the old woman had started to steal treats from my daughter's bag, apparently when I wasn't looking. This is why they asked me to go home. The old woman was creeping them out, and they just wanted to get away from her. I brought my kids home and told my wife what happened. We made sure to check all of their candy, but didn't find anything suspicious or off about it. We didn't call the police or anything, since nothing really happened. But thinking back, I kind of regret that decision now. What was that old woman even doing, and who the hell was that man following us around? I don't think I'll ever know. I just think it's sick that there are people out there on Halloween, hiding behind masks pretending to be children.